Marcus Henderson never expected his fortune to become both a blessing and a curse. The tech billionaire had built his empire from nothing, starting with a small software company in his garage that eventually became one of the world's largest cloud computing platforms. Now, at 42, he owned mansions across 3 continents, a private jet, and more money than most small countries. But wealth, he had learned, brought its own unique set of problems. The Henderson estate in Malibu stretched across 15 acres of pristine coastline. The main house alone contained 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a private cinema, an indoor pool, and a wine cellar that held bottles worth more than most people's annual salaries. Marcus had purchased the property 5 years earlier, not just for its beauty, but for its privacy and security. High walls, advanced alarm systems, and a team of security personnel ensured that his family could live without constant worry about kidnapping attempts or other threats that came with extreme wealth. His wife, Sarah, had initially been hesitant about the isolated location. She worried about their 8-year-old twins, Emma and Jake, growing up so far removed from normal childhood experiences. But Marcus had convinced her that the security benefits outweighed any social disadvantages. They could always arrange play dates and activities, he argued, but they couldn't replace their children if something happened to them. The twins were the light of Marcus's life. Despite his demanding schedule running a global corporation, he made sure to spend quality time with Emma and Jake every day he was home. Emma was fascinated by computers and coding, often sitting beside him in his home office as he worked. Jake preferred outdoor activities and had developed an impressive collection of insects and rocks from exploring the estate's grounds. Both children were bright, curious, and surprisingly well-adjusted considering their unusual circumstances. Sarah managed the household with military precision. Between charity work, social obligations, and raising the twins, she stayed busy from morning until night. She had learned early in their marriage that running a billionaire's household was essentially a full-time executive position. Every detail needed attention, from coordinating with security teams to managing a staff of 12 full-time employees. The decision to install additional security cameras throughout the house had been Sarah's idea. Several high-profile kidnapping cases involving wealthy families had made headlines that summer, and she felt their current security measures weren't comprehensive enough. The existing system monitored the perimeter and main entrances, but she wanted coverage of every room where the children might spend time. Marcus initially resisted the idea. He valued privacy and felt that cameras inside their home crossed a line. But Sarah's concerns were valid, and after consulting with their security team, he agreed to a compromise. They would install cameras in common areas, hallways, and the children's playrooms, but not in bedrooms or bathrooms. The feeds would be encrypted and accessible only to them and their head of security, Thomas Reynolds. Thomas had been with the family for 3 years. A former FBI agent with 25 years of experience, he took his responsibility for the family's safety seriously. He lived in a small apartment above the estate's security office and was available around the clock. His background checks on all household staff were thorough, and he updated their security protocols regularly based on evolving threats. The camera installation took 2 weeks to complete. The security company used the latest technology, with cameras so small they were virtually invisible. Each unit could record in high definition, had night vision capabilities, and could be accessed remotely through a secure app on Marcus and Sarah's phones. The system stored footage for 30 days before automatically deleting older files. Once activated, the cameras provided peace of mind that Marcus hadn't realized he needed. He could check on the twins from his office downtown and see them playing safely in the house. Sarah appreciated being able to monitor the entire household, even when she was out handling errands or attending meetings. The staff had been informed about the new security measures, though they weren't told the exact locations of all cameras. This was standard practice, according to Thomas, as it ensured that security couldn't be compromised by someone with inside knowledge. The household employees seemed to accept the changes without complaint, understanding that working for a family of Marcus's prominence came with certain security requirements. Among the staff was Maria Santos, a 34-year-old woman from El Salvador who had been working as the family's nanny and housekeeper for 18 months. Maria had come highly recommended from an agency that specialized in placing domestic staff with wealthy families. Her references were impeccable, her English was excellent, and she had immediately connected with Emma and Jake. Maria's background was both tragic and inspiring. She had fled El Salvador during a period of extreme violence, leaving behind her own family to seek safety in the United States. She had worked various jobs while learning English and eventually found her calling in childcare. Her gentle nature and genuine love for children made her perfect for working with the Henderson twins. The children adored Maria. She helped them with homework, played games with them, and told them stories about her homeland that sparked their curiosity about the world beyond their privileged bubble. Sarah often commented that Maria was more like family than an employee, and Marcus appreciated how Maria's presence allowed him and Sarah to maintain their demanding schedules without worrying about the children's care. Maria lived in a small apartment in nearby Santa Monica, about a 20-minute drive from the estate. She arrived each morning at 7 and typically left around 6 in the evening, unless Marcus and Sarah had evening commitments that required her to stay later. On weekends, she worked shorter hours, coming in mainly to help with any special activities or events the family had planned. The first few weeks after the camera installation passed without incident. Marcus gradually grew accustomed to being able to check the feeds from his office, though he tried not to become obsessive about it. The cameras served their intended purpose of providing security without significantly impacting the family's daily routines. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when Marcus first noticed something unusual. He had arrived at his downtown office early, around 6:30, to prepare for a conference call with his company's Asian partners. While waiting for his assistant to arrive, he decided to check the home security feeds, something he did most mornings as part of his routine. The twins were still asleep, and Sarah was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Maria had arrived a few minutes early and was in the playroom, apparently organizing toys and books for the day ahead. Everything appeared normal at first glance. But as Marcus watched, he noticed Maria doing something odd. She appeared to be speaking to someone, though no one else was visible in the room. At first, he thought she might be talking to herself or perhaps singing, which wouldn't be unusual, but her body language suggested she was having a conversation with another person. Marcus adjusted the camera angle using the app's controls and increased the audio sensitivity. The system's microphones were sensitive enough to pick up conversations in most rooms, though the audio quality varied depending on background noise and distance from the cameras. As he listened more carefully, he could hear Maria speaking in Spanish. His own Spanish was limited to basic phrases, but he could tell she was having an animated conversation with someone. The strange part was that he couldn't see or hear anyone responding to her. Initially, Marcus assumed she was talking on a phone using earbuds or a hands-free device. Many of the staff used such devices to stay in touch with family while working. But as he watched more closely, he didn't see any evidence of communication devices. The conversation continued for about 10 minutes. Maria's tone varied from what sounded like concern to excitement to what might have been frustration. She gestured frequently, as if responding to someone's questions or comments. At one point, she moved to a corner of the room and lowered her voice, as if trying to keep the conversation private. Marcus felt uncomfortable watching what was clearly intended to be a private moment, but his security instincts, honed by years of protecting his family and business, kept him focused on the screen. Something about the situation felt off, though he couldn't articulate exactly what was bothering him. The conversation ended abruptly when Marcus heard Emma's voice calling for Maria from upstairs. Maria immediately stopped talking and left the playroom to attend to the children. Her demeanor shifted instantly from whatever emotional state she had been in during the conversation to her usual cheerful, professional manner with the kids. Marcus tried to dismiss his concerns as paranoia. Wealthy individuals often became overly suspicious of those around them, and he didn't want to fall into that trap. Maria had been nothing but trustworthy and caring with his children. Her personal life, including who she chose to talk to and when, was her own business as long as it didn't interfere with her work. But the incident stayed on his mind throughout the day. During a break between meetings, he found himself checking the security feeds more frequently than usual. He didn't observe any other unusual behavior, but he made a mental note to pay closer attention to Maria's activities. Over the next few days, Marcus noticed the pattern repeating. Almost every morning, shortly after Maria arrived, and before the children were fully awake, she would have these conversations in Spanish with an invisible companion. The talks always took place in areas where she was alone, and she always stopped immediately when interrupted or when the children needed attention. Marcus began recording these sessions, telling himself it was just a precautionary measure. He still had no concrete reason to suspect anything wrong, but his business success had largely been built on trusting his instincts when something didn't feel right. The breakthrough came on a Friday morning when Marcus decided to arrive at the office even earlier than usual. He wanted to watch Maria's morning routine from the beginning to see if he could understand what was happening. He accessed the security feeds from his car in the estate's driveway, giving him a real-time view as Maria arrived for work. This time he was ready with the audio controls optimized and the camera angles adjusted for the best possible view. As Maria entered the house and made her way to the playroom, Marcus watched and listened with intense focus. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Maria wasn't talking to herself or to someone on a phone. She was speaking directly to two small children who appeared to be hiding in areas of the playroom that the cameras couldn't clearly see. Marcus could hear young voices responding to her in Spanish, though the words were often unclear due to their distance from the microphones. From what he could gather, Maria was asking the children questions about how they had slept, whether they were hungry, and reminding them to stay quiet until it was safe to come out. The tone of the conversation was nurturing and protective, the way a mother might speak to her own children. Marcus's hands trembled as he tried to adjust the camera angles to get a better view of wherever these children were hiding. The playroom was large and filled with furniture, toy boxes, and play structures that created numerous blind spots where small children could remain hidden from the cameras. After several minutes of careful observation, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement near a large toy castle in the corner of the room. For just a moment, he saw what appeared to be two children, probably around 5 or 6 years old, crouched behind the structure. They were too far from the camera to make out clear details, but they were definitely there. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. Somehow, Maria had been bringing two young children into his home every morning without anyone's knowledge. They were hiding in his house while she worked, staying out of sight of the family and the security team. His first instinct was to call Thomas immediately and have Maria confronted. But something held him back. The way Maria spoke to these children suggested they weren't there for any malicious purpose. Her tone was protective, even desperate. These weren't accomplices in some criminal scheme. They seemed more like children who needed protection. Marcus sat in his car for another 20 minutes, watching and trying to understand what he was witnessing. The children remained hidden while Maria went about her normal morning routine of preparing for Emma and Jake's wake-up. Occasionally, she would return to the playroom and quietly reassure the hidden children, bringing them what appeared to be small snacks and drinks. As the Henderson twins began stirring upstairs, the mysterious children seemed to settle in for a long period of remaining hidden. Maria's behavior with Emma and Jake was exactly as it had always been. Warm, attentive, and completely natural. Marcus realized he was facing a situation unlike anything in his experience. His family's security had been compromised, but not in any way he had imagined or prepared for. Two unknown children were essentially living in his house during the day, and he had no idea who they were, where they came from, or why Maria felt the need to hide them. The questions multiplied in his mind. Were these children in danger? Were they illegal immigrants? Were they Maria's own children? If so, why couldn't she arrange proper childcare? Was this some kind of emergency situation? Or had it been going on longer than he realized? As Marcus finally drove to his office, he knew he couldn't ignore what he had discovered. The safety of his own children had to be his primary concern, but he also felt a growing responsibility for the two unknown children who were apparently depending on Maria for protection. He decided he needed more information before taking any action. Confronting Maria immediately might cause the children to flee, potentially putting them in greater danger, but continuing to allow unknown individuals to remain hidden in his home posed risks he couldn't fully evaluate. Marcus spent the rest of that Friday in a state of distracted anxiety. He canceled 2 important meetings and found himself checking the security feeds obsessively. By late afternoon, he had made a decision that would change everything for everyone involved. He was going to conduct his own investigation first, gathering as much information as possible about the situation before involving authorities or even confronting Maria directly. His children's safety would remain the top priority, but he also felt an obligation to understand what was really happening before taking any irreversible actions. That evening, after Sarah and the twins had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone in his study and began planning the most important investigation of his life. He had the resources, technology, and determination to uncover the truth. What he didn't yet realize was how much that truth would test everything he believed about justice, family, and the responsibilities that came with his enormous privilege. Marcus spent the entire weekend developing his investigation strategy. He couldn't risk alerting Maria or compromising the safety of any children involved, but he also couldn't allow the situation to continue indefinitely without understanding the full scope of what was happening in his home. His first step was to conduct a comprehensive review of all security footage from the past month. If children had been hiding in his house regularly, there would be additional evidence beyond what he had observed that Friday morning. Marcus locked himself in his home office and began the painstaking process of reviewing hours of recorded material. What he discovered was both more extensive and more troubling than he had imagined. The pattern had been going on for at least 3 weeks, possibly longer. Every weekday morning, Maria arrived with 2 children who immediately went into hiding. The children appeared to be well practiced at remaining out of sight, suggesting this had been happening for an extended period. More disturbing was the evidence that the children occasionally moved around the house during the day when the Henderson family was out. Marcus found footage of them in the kitchen getting food, using a bathroom near the back of the house, and even playing quietly in a guest room that was rarely used. They moved like ghosts through his home, always staying away from areas where they might encounter Emma, Jake, Sarah, or any other staff members. The children appeared to be a boy and a girl, both probably around 6 years old. They looked thin, but not malnourished, and their clothing, while simple, was clean. Most importantly, they showed no signs of fear or distress around Maria. Their interactions with her were affectionate and trusting, suggesting a close relationship. Marcus also noticed that Maria had been bringing extra food into the house. She often volunteered to do grocery shopping for the family, and reviewing the receipts, Marcus could see purchases that seemed excessive for the Henderson household's normal needs. Cases of crackers, extra fruit, additional milk, and other items that children would need were being purchased regularly. The financial implications were negligible for Marcus's budget, but the pattern suggested careful planning on Maria's part. She wasn't taking advantage of the family's wealth in an obvious way. Instead, she seemed to be providing for these children using her own resources while taking advantage of her access to the house to give them shelter during the day. By Sunday evening, Marcus had identified at least a dozen instances over the past month where the children had been present in his home. The frequency and duration suggested they were spending roughly 8 hours a day in hiding, corresponding almost exactly with Maria's work schedule. Marcus's next step was to investigate Maria's background more thoroughly. Although Thomas had conducted standard employment screening, Marcus now had resources and motivation for a deeper investigation. He contacted a private investigation firm that his company used for corporate security matters and arranged for a comprehensive background check on Maria Santos. The investigators worked quickly and discreetly. Within 48 hours, Marcus had a detailed report that revealed information that hadn't been discovered during the initial employment screening. Maria's situation was far more complex and tragic than anyone had realized. Maria did have children of her own, the 2 children Marcus had seen hiding in his house. Their names were Diego and Sofia, ages 6 and 7 respectively. According to records the investigators were able to access, the children had been living with Maria's sister Carmen in Los Angeles, while Maria worked to establish herself and save money to bring them to live with her. The investigators discovered that Carmen had been arrested 3 months earlier on drug-related charges and was currently serving a sentence in county jail. Child Protective Services had been called, but in the chaos of an overwhelmed system, Diego and Sofia had somehow fallen through the cracks. They hadn't been placed in foster care, and there were no official records of their current custody situation. From what the investigators could piece together, Maria had taken her children rather than let them enter the foster care system. Given her undocumented status, she had been terrified that contacting authorities would result in all of them being deported to El Salvador, where the children had never lived and where violence had only worsened since Maria had fled. Maria's living situation made caring for the children extremely difficult. Her apartment was tiny, barely adequate for one person, and her lease prohibited additional occupants. Her landlord lived in the same building and would certainly notice 2 children staying there regularly. Additionally, Maria couldn't afford childcare, and leaving Diego and Sofia alone all day wasn't safe or legal. The investigation revealed that Maria had been in an impossible situation. She couldn't afford to lose her job with the Hendersons, as it was her only source of income and provided health insurance that covered her diabetes medication. She couldn't leave the children alone, and she couldn't afford proper care for them. Her solution had been to bring them to work with her, hiding them in the one place where she could ensure their safety while maintaining her employment. Marcus found himself feeling a complex mixture of anger, sympathy, and admiration as he absorbed this information. His security had been compromised, and his family had been unknowingly sharing their home with strangers. But Maria's actions weren't motivated by malice or greed. She was a desperate mother trying to protect her children in a system that had failed them. The investigators' report also revealed additional details about Maria's character that explained why the Henderson family had grown to trust her so completely. She sent nearly half her paycheck to family members in El Salvador who were struggling with poverty and violence. She attended English classes 3 nights a week to improve her job prospects. She volunteered at a local church, helping other immigrant families navigate bureaucratic challenges. Marcus realized he was facing a decision that went far beyond simple security concerns. He could report the situation to authorities, which would likely result in Maria's immediate deportation and the children entering foster care. He could fire Maria and demand she remove the children from his property, though this would leave her homeless and unemployed with 2 young children to support. Or he could find a way to help that addressed everyone's needs. Before making any decision, Marcus wanted to understand more about Diego and Sofia themselves. Were they happy? Were they receiving education? Were they healthy? Using the security cameras, he began observing their behavior more carefully during the times when they moved around the house. What he observed impressed and moved him. Despite their unusual circumstances, Diego and Sofia were remarkably well-behaved children. They cleaned up after themselves, were careful not to damage or disturb anything in the house, and showed genuine affection for each other. They played quietly, often using simple games that required no toys or equipment. Marcus noticed that Maria had been teaching them English during their time in hiding. He could hear her quietly quizzing them on vocabulary and helping them practice pronunciation. She had also been providing them with basic education, bringing children's books and workbooks that she reviewed with them during breaks in her duties with Emma and Jake. The children showed no signs of behavioral problems or distress. They seemed to understand the importance of staying hidden and cooperated fully with the complex routine that allowed them to spend days in the Henderson house undetected. Their maturity and adaptability suggested they had faced significant challenges before and had developed coping skills beyond their years. Marcus also observed the interaction between his own children and Maria during this period, looking for any signs that her attention was divided or that Emma and Jake were receiving less care because of the hidden children. To his surprise, Maria's performance with his children hadn't suffered at all. She remained fully engaged, patient, and attentive to Emma and Jake's needs. By Wednesday of the following week, Marcus had made his decision. But before acting on it, he needed to have a conversation with Sarah. His wife deserved to know what had been happening in their home, and any solution he pursued would require her support and understanding. Marcus chose to tell Sarah on Wednesday evening after the children had gone to bed. He had prepared carefully for the conversation, anticipating her likely reactions and concerns. He showed her the security footage, shared the investigators' findings, and explained his own observations over the past week. Sarah's initial reaction was exactly what Marcus had expected: shock, concern for their children's safety, and anger that they had been deceived. She struggled to understand how Maria could have put Emma and Jake at risk by bringing strangers into their home without permission. But as Marcus shared more details about Maria's situation and the children's behavior, Sarah's perspective began to shift. As a mother herself, she could imagine the desperation that would drive someone to take such extreme measures to protect their children. The idea of Diego and Sofia being separated from their mother and placed in an overburdened foster care system troubled her deeply. Sarah asked to review the security footage herself, wanting to make her own assessment of the situation. She spent over an hour watching recordings of Diego and Sofia moving through their house, paying particular attention to how they interacted with Maria and how they behaved when alone. Like Marcus, Sarah was struck by the children's maturity and good behavior. She was also moved by the gentle way Maria cared for them, providing education and emotional support while managing her responsibilities to the Henderson family. The conversation between Marcus and Sarah continued past midnight as they wrestled with the ethical and practical implications of the situation. Both felt that simply reporting Maria to authorities would be cruel and wouldn't serve anyone's best interests. But they also couldn't ignore the fact that their home security had been compromised and that they had unknowingly been responsible for two children they knew nothing about. Sarah raised concerns that Marcus hadn't fully considered. What if one of the children had been injured while hiding in their house? What would have happened if Emma or Jake had discovered Diego and Sofia during the day? How could they be sure that Maria's story was completely truthful and that there weren't additional risks they hadn't identified? Marcus acknowledged these concerns, but argued that they had an opportunity to help a family in desperate circumstances while also resolving the security issues. He proposed a solution that would address everyone's needs while maintaining appropriate boundaries. His plan was ambitious but straightforward. The Henderson family would sponsor Maria's legal immigration status, helping her obtain proper documentation to remain in the United States. They would also provide assistance with housing that could accommodate her children and help arrange proper child care so that Diego and Sofia wouldn't need to hide in their house during the day. In exchange, Maria would commit to complete transparency about her family situation and would accept additional background screening to ensure there were no other surprises. The children would receive proper medical care and education, and the family would establish clear boundaries and expectations for Maria's continued employment. Sarah was initially skeptical about the plan's complexity and cost, but Marcus reminded her that the financial impact would be minimal compared to their overall wealth. More importantly, they had an opportunity to transform a desperate situation into a positive outcome for everyone involved. The plan would require legal consultation to ensure they handled Maria's immigration status correctly. It would also require coordination with schools to get Diego and Sofia enrolled in proper education programs. But Marcus had confidence that these challenges could be addressed with adequate resources and professional assistance. By Thursday morning, Marcus and Sarah had agreed to move forward with the plan. But first, they needed to confront Maria directly and give her the opportunity to explain the situation in her own words. They wanted to hear her perspective before implementing any solutions, and they needed to ensure she was willing to accept help that came with increased oversight and expectations. Marcus arranged to work from home that Thursday, planning to have the conversation with Maria during the children's afternoon nap time when they could talk privately without Emma and Jake overhearing. He spent the morning rehearsing how to approach the subject in a way that wouldn't cause Maria to panic or try to run. As he watched the security feeds that morning, seeing Diego and Sofia once again hiding in his playroom while Maria cared for his children, Marcus felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. The next few hours would determine the future for 2 families and 4 children. The conversation he was about to have with Maria would test everything he believed about responsibility, privilege, and the ways wealthy individuals could use their resources to create positive change. Marcus had built his fortune by making difficult decisions under pressure and finding creative solutions to complex problems. But the decision he was about to propose to Maria would be the most important negotiation of his life, with stakes that went far beyond money or business success. 4 children's futures hung in the balance, and Marcus was determined to find a solution that protected everyone while addressing the underlying problems that had created this desperate situation. The confrontation Marcus had been preparing for began at 2:30 on Thursday afternoon. Emma and Jake had just settled in for their naps, and the house had the quiet, peaceful atmosphere that typically characterized early afternoon. Marcus found Maria in the kitchen, cleaning up after the children's lunch and preparing snacks for when they woke up. "Maria, could I speak with you privately for a few minutes?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone as calm and non-threatening as possible. "Maybe we could sit in the living room." Maria looked up with surprise. In 18 months of employment, Marcus had rarely initiated private conversations with her. Their interactions were usually brief and focused on specific instructions about the children's care or household matters. The request clearly made her nervous, but she nodded and followed him to the living room. Marcus had positioned himself near the window, where he could see the entire room and where Maria would feel less trapped. He wanted this conversation to feel like a discussion between adults, not an interrogation by an employer catching an employee in wrongdoing. "Maria, I want to talk to you about something I've discovered recently," Marcus began carefully. "I want you to know that you're not in trouble, and whatever we discuss today, my primary concern is making sure everyone stays safe. That includes you." Maria's expression immediately shifted to one of barely controlled panic. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap, and Marcus could see her processing various possibilities of what he might have discovered. The fact that he had mentioned safety seemed to particularly alarm her. "Before I explain what I know, I want you to have the opportunity to tell me anything about your work here that you think I should know about," Marcus continued. "Anything at all that might affect my family's security or your ability to care for Emma and Jake." The silence stretched for nearly a full minute as Maria struggled with her response. Marcus could see her weighing her options, probably considering denial, partial truth, or complete honesty. Her financial survival and her children's welfare depended on keeping her job, but she also seemed to realize that Marcus already knew something significant. Finally, Maria spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Henderson, I need to tell you something that may make you very angry with me. But before I do, please let me explain that I would never do anything to hurt Emma and Jake. They are like my own children, and their safety is the most important thing to me. Marcus nodded encouragingly, though his heart was racing as the conversation moved toward the revelation he had been dreading and anticipating. I have been bringing my children to work with me, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger as she committed to honesty. Diego and Sofia, they are 6 and 7 years old. They stay hidden while I work, and they never go near Emma and Jake or disturb anything in your home. But I know what I did was wrong, and I know you have every right to fire me and call the police. The relief Marcus felt at finally having the situation in the open was mixed with admiration for Maria's courage in telling the truth. He could see that this admission was terrifying for her, but she was choosing honesty despite the potential consequences. Can you tell me why you felt this was your only option? Marcus asked gently. I want to understand your situation so we can figure out the best way to help everyone. This question clearly surprised Maria. She had been prepared for anger, demands for explanation, and immediate termination. The suggestion that Marcus might want to help rather than punish caught her off guard, and tears began flowing down her cheeks as she struggled to maintain composure. My sister Carmen was arrested 3 months ago, Maria began, and then told Marcus the entire story. She spoke about fleeing El Salvador, about working multiple jobs to establish herself in America, about finally saving enough money to bring Diego and Sofia to live with her. She explained Carmen's arrest, the failure of Child Protective Services to properly handle her children, and her terror of the foster care system. As Maria talked, Marcus realized that the investigator's report had only captured part of her story. The human details, the sleepless nights worrying about her children's safety, the impossible choice between keeping her job and caring for Diego and Sofia, the daily stress of maintaining their hiding routine, painted a picture of a woman who had exhausted every other option before resorting to such an extreme solution. They are good children, Mr. Henderson, Maria said, her voice pleading. They understand they must stay hidden and quiet. They clean up after themselves, they don't touch anything that doesn't belong to them, and they never go where they might disturb your family. I give them lessons and make sure they eat properly. But I know what I did was wrong to bring them here without permission. Marcus leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. Maria, I'm not angry with you. I'm concerned about the safety of all 4 children involved, including yours. But I think there might be a way to solve this problem that helps everyone. He spent the next 20 minutes outlining the plan he and Sarah had developed. He explained that they wanted to help Maria obtain legal immigration status, find appropriate housing for her family, and arrange proper child care and education for Diego and Sofia. In exchange, they would need complete transparency about Maria's situation and additional background screening to ensure there were no other complications. Maria's reaction was a mixture of disbelief, gratitude, and continued fear. The offer seemed too good to be true, and she worried there might be conditions or expectations that would prove impossible to meet. But as Marcus provided more details about the legal assistance and practical support they were offering, she began to understand that the Henderson family was serious about helping her build a stable life for her children. Why would you do this for me? Maria asked, voicing the question that was clearly central to her confusion about the situation. I deceived you and brought strangers into your home without permission. Why don't you just fire me and call immigration services? Marcus considered his response carefully. Because firing you doesn't solve the underlying problem. Diego and Sofia would still need care and protection. You would still need employment and legal status, and we would lose someone who has become important to our family. More importantly, we have the resources to help, and with those resources comes responsibility to use them wisely. The conversation was interrupted when Emma called for Maria from upstairs, having woken up from her nap earlier than usual. Maria immediately stood to attend to her, but Marcus asked her to wait a moment longer. "Before you go upstairs, I want you to know that Diego and Sofia can come out of hiding now," Marcus said gently. "I'd like to meet them properly, and I think it would be good for them to not spend the rest of the day cramped in the playroom." Maria's eyes widened with shock. She had assumed that Marcus had only suspected something was wrong, not that he knew exactly what was happening and where her children were hidden. The realization that he had been observing them without taking immediate action seemed to finally convince her that his intentions were genuinely helpful rather than punitive. "You know where they are?" she asked quietly. "I've been watching the security cameras for the past week," Marcus admitted. "I wanted to understand the full situation before taking any action. Diego and Sofia seem like remarkable children who have been handling an incredibly difficult situation with impressive maturity." Marcus accompanied Maria to the playroom, where Diego and Sofia were indeed hidden behind the toy castle where he had first glimpsed them. When Maria spoke to them in Spanish, explaining that it was safe to come out, Marcus got his first clear look at the children who had been living as ghosts in his home. They were smaller than he had expected, clearly nervous but not terrified. Their clothes were clean but worn, and they stayed close to Maria as she introduced them to Marcus. Diego, the younger of the two, held his sister's hand and watched Marcus with the careful attention of a child who had learned to assess adults for potential threats. Marcus crouched down to their eye level and spoke slowly in his limited Spanish. "Hola, Diego. Hola, Sofia. Me llamo Marcus." He then switched to English, knowing that Maria had been teaching them. "You don't need to hide anymore. This is your mama's work, and you're welcome here." Sofia, who appeared to be the more outgoing of the two, responded with a shy, "Hello, Mr. Marcus." Diego remained silent but nodded politely. Both children clearly understood more English than they felt comfortable speaking. Emma's calls from upstairs were becoming more insistent, so Marcus suggested that Maria attend to her while he stayed with Diego and Sofia. This proposal clearly alarmed Maria, who was reluctant to leave her children alone with Marcus, despite his assurances that they would be safe. "They can come upstairs with us," Marcus suggested instead. "Emma and Jake are going to find out about this eventually if we move forward with our plan. Maybe it's better to introduce them now, in a controlled way." This suggestion terrified Maria even more. She had worked so hard to keep the two parts of her life separate, and the idea of Emma and Jake discovering Diego and Sofia felt like crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But Marcus gently explained that integration, rather than continued secrecy, would be necessary for any long-term solution. The introduction between the four children went better than anyone had expected. Emma and Jake were initially surprised to discover other children in their house, but their natural curiosity quickly overcame any confusion. They peppered Diego and Sofia with questions about where they had been hiding and how they had remained so quiet during the day. Diego and Sofia, despite their nervousness, seemed relieved to finally interact with other children after months of isolation. Within minutes, Emma was showing them her collection of books, and Jake was explaining his rock collection with the enthusiasm he typically reserved for his most treasured possessions. Maria watched this interaction with a mixture of joy and continued anxiety. Seeing her children finally able to play openly was clearly a relief. But she remained worried about how the Henderson family would react to having additional children in their home on a regular basis. Sarah returned home earlier than usual that afternoon, having rearranged her schedule so she could meet Diego and Sofia personally. Her reaction to the children was warm but cautious, and Marcus could see her making her own assessment of the situation as she observed how they interacted with Emma and Jake. The evening progressed with careful conversations between Marcus, Sarah, and Maria while the four children played together under close supervision. By the time Diego and Sofia needed to leave for the day, everyone had a better understanding of how the proposed arrangement might work in practice. Over the following weeks, The Henderson family began implementing their plan to help Maria and her children establish a stable life. They hired an immigration attorney who specialized in cases involving undocumented workers and their families. The legal process was complex and would take months to complete, but the attorney was optimistic about Maria's chances for obtaining proper documentation. Finding appropriate housing was easier than expected. The Hendersons knew several other wealthy families who owned rental properties, and they were able to arrange a small house within walking distance of good schools for Diego and Sofia. Marcus and Sarah covered the security deposit and first year's rent, considering it an investment in their family's long-term stability. Enrolling Diego and Sofia in school required additional legal maneuvering, but the immigration attorney was able to expedite the necessary paperwork. Both children were placed in age-appropriate classes with additional English language support. Their teachers were impressed with their basic academic skills, which reflected Maria's efforts to continue their education during the months they had been in hiding. The transformation in Maria was remarkable. With the stress of hiding her children removed, she became more relaxed and open in her interactions with the Henderson family. Her work performance, which had always been excellent, somehow improved even further. Emma and Jake adjusted quickly to having Diego and Sofia around the house during school breaks and weekends. Marcus had been concerned about security implications, but the additional background screening confirmed that Maria posed no threat to his family. In fact, having her children properly integrated into their extended household seemed to strengthen her commitment to the family's well-being. 6 months later, Marcus received the phone call he had been waiting for. Maria's immigration attorney informed him that her application for legal status had been approved. Diego and Sofia would be able to remain in the United States legally, and Maria would no longer live with the constant fear of deportation. The celebration that evening was small but meaningful. Marcus and Sarah presented Maria with official documents confirming her legal status, and she responded with tears of gratitude and relief. For the first time since fleeing El Salvador, she could build a life for her children without constantly looking over her shoulder. Emma and Jake had adapted to having Diego and Sofia as part of their extended family with the easy acceptance that characterizes childhood friendships. The language barriers that had initially made communication difficult gradually disappeared as all 4 children became functionally bilingual through their interactions with each other. A year later, Marcus reflected on how the crisis had transformed everyone involved. His family had learned important lessons about using privilege responsibly and about the complex circumstances that drove people to make desperate choices. Emma and Jake had developed empathy and cultural awareness that would serve them throughout their lives. Maria had found not just security for her children, but genuine integration into American society. Diego and Sofia were thriving in school, making friends, and building the kind of stable childhood that had seemed impossible just months earlier. The security cameras that had originally been installed to protect the Henderson family had instead become the catalyst for expanding their definition of family to include people who needed protection and opportunity. Marcus realized that true security came not from walls and surveillance, but from building communities where everyone's children could thrive safely. The investment the Henderson family had made in Maria's legal status and housing was minimal compared to their overall wealth, but the return on that investment had been immeasurable. They had gained not just continued excellent childcare, but the satisfaction of using their resources to create positive change in the world. Marcus often thought about how differently the story could have ended if he had chosen to report Maria to authorities rather than investigating further. 4 children's lives had been transformed because he had taken the time to understand rather than simply react to a perceived threat. The case became a model for how wealthy families could address immigration and child care issues constructively. Marcus and Sarah began working with other families in their social circle to develop programs that provided legal assistance and economic support for domestic workers seeking to bring their children to the United States safely. Diego and Sofia, now confident English speakers and successful students, occasionally helped Emma and Jake with their Spanish lessons. The children who had once hidden in shadows had become integral members of a family that had grown far beyond its original boundaries. Maria's story became a testament to the power of courage, honesty, and compassion to transform desperate circumstances into opportunities for positive change. The woman who had once risked everything to protect her children had found safety, security, and the chance to build the kind of future she had dreamed about when she first fled El Salvador. The Henderson estate in Malibu remained a secure, private sanctuary for the family. But the definition of family had expanded to include people who had arrived as strangers and stayed as cherished members of a community built on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and the understanding that protecting children requires the participation of entire communities, not just individual families.